Welcome everyone. This session is on the Intro to Enterprise Blockchain session. We'll be here for about 20 or 30 minutes talking about enterprise blockchain. We have a wonderful panel here. I'm Grace Hartley. I'm from ConsenSys and the PegaSys team, and I will let all of you introduce yourselves and tell us about your background and your current project.
So my name is Peter Broadhurst, and I'm the head of engineering on Kaleido. Kaleido is an easy button for adoption of enterprise blockchain. We provide a fully managed service for the blockchain itself, and then all of the services around it that are needed to build a blockchain-centered business network on the technology. I've been in enterprise IT my whole career, 15 years of everything from every piece of the middleware stack that you might come across. Built a few cloud services in the past. So before I started, I was one of the co-founders on Kaleido.
Hi everyone, I'm Daniel Heyman. I'm on PegaSys, which is the protocol engineering group at ConsenSys. We build enterprise-grade Ethereum protocols as well as public Ethereum protocols. You can find our open source software, Hyperledger Besu, on Kaleido. And by the end of October, you'll be able to find our commercial distribution on top of Hyperledger Besu, which is called PegaSys Plus, also on Kaleido and other cloud providers as well.
Hello, Sophia Lopez. I'm one of the founders of Kaleido. I think this panel is particularly interesting for me, just reflecting, having been in the enterprise blockchain space since the very beginning in 2015. Decided in that time was on the IBM, in an IBM role, leading the blockchain efforts there, and was a part of the team that established Hyperledger. So it's been really great to see the PegaSys codebase, Besu, now being part of that community as well. And I guess during the panel can share some reflections. Peter already described what Kaleido is, but why we built Kaleido and how we've seen the different generations of enterprise blockchain evolve from the early days, some of the lessons learned, and what are some of the best practices, sort of tips and tricks from the consortiums that are really leading the way. One of whom, the CTO, is sitting right here from Comgo, a very successful trade finance blockchain-based initiative.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tim Grant. I am the founder and CEO of DrumG. We are a builder and operator of solutions for institutional capital markets globally. And we've got a couple of cool things that we're working on, and we'll talk more about them in the panel. But primarily, we've got 10 of the biggest banks in the world trying to build a solution that gives the control of financial market data back to the banks, which is kind of interesting and exciting when we talk about trust and sort of one of the original premises of blockchain and what it would bring to the ecosystem. That we're actually trying to do it now, but we'll talk more about that.
Great. So let's maybe start high level for those of the group or audience who don't know enterprise blockchain. I guess the first question is there a difference? Are they the same? How do they differentiate in your space? Want to start?
So enterprise has a very different set of requirements on what blockchain is. When you look at the spectrum of projects that are decentralizing, you see those public projects where it's all about individual end user identity. It's all about direct, peer-to-peer, open, transparent communication between one human being and another. That's not what usually enterprise blockchain projects are about. Usually enterprise blockchain projects are about going from ecosystems where all of the data is siloed inside of one organization. All of the control is siloed in one organization, and breaking that out so that maybe that data and control is being shared a little bit more openly to 2 organizations, or 3, or 4, or 5. And breaking beyond the number of 1 is a just transformational success when you look at the way these core systems have been built. So it's not about necessarily millions of identities directly transacting, but it's about control leaving just one organization and going to a few. And that tends to mean there needs to be a lot of privacy on top of the solution. There needs to be a lot of agreement on that smaller bit of data that can be shared, because enterprises aren't going to share everything. So it's very different to a public kind of blockchain project.
Anyone have anything to add?
Well, I think it'd be great from a protocol perspective, since you are designing one custom-made for enterprise blockchain.
So I'll say 2 things. So first, I agree with everything Peter said, though we're starting to see an increasing number of enterprises also interested in public blockchains, though they use them in different ways. Santander had a big announcement, I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, of issuing and settling a bond on Ethereum, which was an exciting milestone. ConsenSys has worked on a project, Mata Capital, which also uses public blockchains. From a protocol perspective, when we usually talk about enterprise blockchains, we talk about the 3 Ps. And so those are permissioning, privacy, and performance. Unlike public blockchains, on enterprise blockchains, you don't want anyone to be able to join. In fact, quite the opposite. You only want certain people, the parties that are intended to join, to participate in the network. So they need to be permissioned. You need to have processes for that. The second, as Peter already mentioned, is privacy. So maybe you don't want transparency across the whole network. You would want 2 banks to be able to interact or transact on the blockchain with data that's accessible via the blockchain without those transactions being visible to everyone. And the third is performance. Because enterprise blockchains have different permissioning and different attack profiles, you can create different consensus algorithms, different systems in place that enable much higher throughput. One of the knocks on blockchain is, well, it doesn't really scale. And right now that's true for public blockchains, although there's great work that's being done to remedy that. Private blockchains already can scale because you have different algorithms in place.
So I think you teed my next question up beautifully, which is we kind of hinted at where are we going, where do we see the next generation. So maybe looking back a little, where are we in the hype cycle for adoption of enterprise blockchain? Sophia, maybe you can start. You mentioned your prior experience.
Sure.
In the space.
I think in the beginning, it was interesting and I think a number of us have been in technology, for long enough to see different ways of innovation around cloud, analytics, mobile, and the level of excitement around blockchain was something I'd never seen really in my career before. So all the way from the C-level, C-suite, down into the data center, this tremendous excitement. So if you look back 4 years ago, people were really trying to get their arms around these P2P networks, protocols, frameworks. It was heavy cryptography, containerized technology. So there was a lot for enterprise to really try to understand and learn. And in terms of from a skills base, they typically weren't skills they had internally. So it was really part of an innovation lab or team. So I think in terms of where we are with the hype cycle, there came a point where there was just blockchain fatigue because people were doing a lot of innovation theater, perhaps, sort of pre-announcing, very excited about the potential of blockchain, announcing their intention to do something, and then coming out the other end of a POC with just barely getting the nodes to talk to each other and stand up and never getting to the business benefits or the ROI, the use case they envisioned. They had to dramatically scale that back. They were spending months to years, millions of dollars, thousands of lines of code. I mean, even if you look at the trade finance space where there were a lot of early entrants, some of those networks 4 years later, if you look at the majority, are not doing anything meaningful, not in production, still struggling. And this is what happens when you have a network, when people are, all trying to sort of get their arms around the open source code base. One thing we used to say even from the early days is you're only as secure as your least secure member. You're only as performant as your least performant member. So you run into a lot of problems when people can't maintain their end of the bargain. If you do look at networks that are speaking this week, such as Comgo, they had incorporated, and I think a best practice is really realizing everyone who's a major player in the industry wants a seat around the table to come and do this as equals. So they set up a separate entity, Comgo, Commodities Go. They incorporated that in August, and they actually, where you look at other trade finance networks, so 4 years later still are not in production, they went into production in 4 months with their first letter of credit use case and rolled out subsequent ones such as KYC, and actually just announced in the last 2 months $500 million of transactions on this blockchain-based network. So I think there's been a real evolution of technology, sort of moving from, some people have gotten stuck at the POC phase and really hit that blockchain fatigue. Some have moved into pilots where now you have real data, 5 or 6 participants, but you run into the really a paradigm we call shared IT. So now you're trying to do IT together. It's not putting an application up in your own data center. It's doing that with one copy of the shared data across all the members in the network and shared application logic. Something as simple as onboarding a new member becomes very difficult, especially in this permissioned private world where you want to know who you're transacting with, you want to know the organizational identity, and you really are looking at that sort of full B2B stack that this shared network needs. and then pushing into production, integrating with your systems and sources of data. So I'd say sort of the next gen tooling really is, is built. We built Kaleido for bringing those modern business networks together. But certainly, I think you need to look at that full picture, and think the hype cycle, there'll still be people who will continue, today and just pick up something and maybe get stuck. So I think it's smart to learn from others and look at the real business results and how they're achieving them, and learn from that, because there's already solid 4 years of history to look at.
So what would you say is the secret sauce to getting to production?
I'm not going to tell you. No, so look, here's the thing, right? I agree with what you're saying, Sophia, about the sort of the early exuberance and the POC mania, which was actually counterproductive in the long run. And I will admit to having done my bit in that whole process, as a lot of us in this space have had to just get some traction. The issue, I think, if you talk about the hype cycle and where we are and how we get to the Holy Grail, which is, what's the Holy Grail? It's that this is being deployed at scale. And in this environment, at this conference, you have to be talking about large, globally important institutions. That's what this is about. This is about institutional, global marketplace, financial marketplace. And where are the examples of that being done at scale? And the truth is, there just aren't that many. They're very, very, very few. And measured by what metric? Well, measured by the extent to which those organizations have gone through lengthy and deliberate onboarding processes to allow their really sensitive data to be operating in these new networks. That's when we'll know that they are, and they're being used regularly, right? Not just for a few things, not just, things can be in production and can be live, but not really delivering value. You need all the pieces. And actually, the way to get there, I actually think probably you would all agree that it's less about a technology problem now. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, for sure. Now I think these things can be deployed at scale. I think they're ready. There's generally, we can solve those problems. I don't think that's the blocker anymore. I think the blocker is that, like any emerging technology, we all fall into the trap of talking about the technology. Can't help ourselves. We're on an enterprise blockchain panel, and really no one goes out to buy enterprise blockchain. No one goes out to buy databases for the similar reasons, right? What we really need to talk about is, what is this doing? What's the collective action problems that we want to solve? And I think you're alluding to it. You called it shared IT. I think that this notion of institutions having to collaborate, well, these are collective action problems that we need to solve. The real value in a network-based technology like this is that a number of players and entities come together, and between them they agree that there's a better way to do this, that leverages some of the elements you mentioned about the data and the trust and the control and the ownership and the rights and the obligations and the economics, right? All of that, that's really the challenge. And I think people like Comgo and other institutions who are trying to corral the players together, I suspect will tell you that this is less about the technology. It's definitely a component, and the execution risk is real. But getting those institutions to engage and actually mean it and want to do it, I think is by far the biggest problem that the whole industry is challenging with. And it's interesting at something like Sibos, where the tagline of the year is thriving in a hyper-connected world, which I find to be kind of remarkably 1998 in its sort of, like my dad used to talk about the information superhighway when about the internet, which is a very dad thing to say. Well, so is thriving in a hyper-connected world, if I may. Like, well, really, there's nothing new and innovative about that. What value are we creating? What are we doing? Is decentralization what we're really aiming for? I don't know if that is the answer. I think there's something measurable which has to be valuable. Democratizing access to things is valuable. Removing inefficiency is valuable. Allowing us to do new business in new ways is valuable. That's not valuable. Enterprise blockchain is not valuable. And hey, I'm a zealot. I've devoted my career to this now, but I don't want to bang on about enterprise blockchain. I want to bang on about what problems we're solving. And I don't think we're doing that enough, both as providers and as participants. That's going to be the next big frontier, I think.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I mean, we definitely see two types of, I guess, organizations come to us. There's one who's squarely looking at better, faster, cheaper, and achieving the efficiencies around today's business processes. They might be moving from paper-based, was never really fully digitalized, so they're looking at a digital transformation and really moving to this more of the ecosystem economy, shared network approach. And then the other group is, and they might not just be paper-based, but on decades-old, 30-year-old systems running on very old servers. And then the other class, there are also some looking for the revolution. How can they really reimagine their business process? How can they address age-old problems that really had never been solved before? And we look at different clients and networks such as Union Bank in the Philippines as starting with the better, faster, cheaper, but from the beginning, taking a lot of the cost out of domestic remittances to really help the unbanked in their country, but moving very quickly. They've already announced a stable coin. They've already done cross-country transfers, and they're moving quickly on a platform that they really just announced a year and a half ago, onboarding hundreds of rural banks as well. So I think there's those two classes of clients, but if you start with showing the business value and look at really eliminating costs from existing processes, then you can develop that longer roadmap as well. I do think as the industry is preparing potentially for a recession mindset with the inverted yield curve and some of the other macroeconomic factors, you need to look really closely. I mean, in some of the financial services sectors have really suffered from low margins, trying to figure out what they need to do going forward, and looking at people, process, and technology. I do think we're coming to a point where, change management gurus say you need a burning platform to change. So they may have started with the shadow ledgers or experimentation, but I do think the technology is there, the know-how is there to really now use these as organizations prepare and really, ready themselves for the coming next few years.
No, that's very interesting. I think hearing about, not just what you can solve now, but also anticipating problems or future problems is a good way to think of how you could leverage blockchain. Taking a step maybe down, we've kind of hovered at the blockchain level. Why would you recommend enterprises use Ethereum in particular, since ConsenSys is sitting in the Ethereum ecosystem?
Happy to go first. So before anything else, I think Ethereum's biggest strength is its community. So it has by far the most active developer community. It makes it easier to find tooling out there, find pre-written resources, learn from other people's mistakes, find talent for your projects. Community means the pace of innovation is faster, the research that's going on is multidimensional and incredible. Beyond that, though, the technology, I think, is the most future-proof. I think one thing all organizations ask us when they come to the table today is, how do I make sure I'm choosing the right technology, not just for today, but for 5 years from now, because we don't want to have to redo this in 5 years. And so Ethereum has multiple implementers of enterprise-grade technology, trying different approaches. It has the mainnet compatibility. These are unique to all the other enterprise blockchain providers, and means that you're taking much less of a risk when you choose to bet on Ethereum than other providers. And so I think you should always work with PegaSys and Hyperledger Besu, but the fact that Quorum is out there and Clearmatics is out there and there are other providers means that it's a lot easier for you to have confidence that your solution will last the test of time.
Yeah, I'll just add, I wanted maybe one of you two gentlemen to start, just given your vantage point, but I think from a business perspective, looking at skills, just looking at future-proofing, I mean, the ecosystem always wins. When you have 30 times the amount of developers around that ecosystem, and when you have a standards body that's leading with a specification, that really drives the right sort of ecosystem development. We saw that with Java. You've seen that many times over, so a lot of confidence there. And as you look at interoperability and a lot of the public-private with all challenges clients are looking for, if you look at the ability to pull in the latest innovations, I mean, a week ago we announced adding zero-knowledge proofs to the platform, which it's pretty technical, maybe for some of the folks with a business background, but just having these most cutting edge levels of privacy available and have that coming just organically being developed with Turing Award winners, professors bringing that, hardening it. Some of these technologies have already been in the market for 3 years and working with enterprises. So I think just further proves that the ecosystem is really there, and it's a differentiator for the Ethereum community.
Great. So we could talk all day, but maybe I'll, yes. But maybe one last question, and then we can take a question from the audience. So what is the most exciting thing each of you are working on within the enterprise blockchain space? Tim, why don't you start?
Sure. So we're building two things, but one's we've kind of, in the short run, kind of walked away from it, or at least put it on the back burner, because something is starting to look very real, and that's the exciting part. So we're talking a lot this week about the Titanium network, which is DrumG's first product. So what's exciting about that is, as kind of following on from what I said earlier about, focus on the thing that you're doing rather than the technology, we started to kind of figure out with our stakeholder group, which is 10 of the biggest banks in the world, led by Credit Suisse, who are very publicly supporting us, and the 9 others between them represent a pretty significant portion of capital markets sort of activity. And so we've been talking with them, and we realized that actually the problem we were solving, and it was sort of sitting right there under our nose all along, but we didn't really call it that. We never said that. We were always talking about something else. We always had a very enterprise blockchain mindset, and actually it turns out we're in the trust game. It turns out we're in the control of data game. And we were in one of our meetings, and one of the bank's managing director at a very prestigious bank said, "We want our data back," as he literally banged the table and said, "We want our data back." And then we realized that we were actually that's what we were bringing. That was the value. We were giving the control and ownership of this sensitive and valuable data back to the banks. So what exactly are we doing? That's very high level. So at the moment, the largest single marketplace in the world is actually the OTC derivatives marketplace. It's 500, as of the last BIS numbers, $544 trillion in size. That's all the outstanding notionals of all the derivatives contracts in the world. It's the single biggest market, bar none. And that is traded by a relatively small number of institutions, actually. It's pretty concentrated in, the top 20, 30, 40 banks in the world. So we have, the 10 banks that we have represent 40% of all the outstanding in the world, which happens to be, if you do the math, 40% times 544. I mean, this is over $200 trillion in assets. Okay, so now we're excited because we're solving a big problem. But what are we solving for the 200 trillion in assets? Well, they have to be valued. And they have to be valued every day. And the regulators don't trust banks to value them themselves, because banks shouldn't be trusted to validate themselves, because they'll put it wherever they want it to be to make it work for them. So that was figured out a long time ago after a bunch of people went to jail. And now just call a spade a spade. And now they have to do what's called consensus-based pricing. And so they send their marks at the end of every day, and some services aggregate them, and then they use that for regulatory capital purposes and for compliance purposes. The problem is today, A, it costs millions of dollars, way more than what this really is actually a glorified spreadsheet. And then 2, they don't own the data when it's finally aggregated. And the banks are suddenly waking up going, wait a minute, why are these large institutions like Bloomberg, Reuters, IDC, Market all making boatloads of money on my data? A bit like when we woke up one day and found out that Facebook was stealing our data, and Google, etc. And so the solution we have is we give that back. And we use, as Peter, everything you said in your intro was spot on. It's like what they really want is the control, the ownership, the rights and obligations and economics of their own data. This is a fundamental component of the way banks are thinking about harvesting and monetizing their own data that they own, which is what we should all do as individuals. So that's the most exciting thing we're doing. And we're going live today for the first time with FX data for the $6.6 trillion volume per day FX market.
Wow. Congratulations. That's a big feat. Sophia, do you want to talk about Kaleido and what's exciting there these days?
Yeah, I know we're running out of time. So I think just you can hear the passion that Tim has around his use case and the clients he's working with. we've been working with a third of the top 20 banks with the Comgo network, and it's been exciting to see sort of traditional industries. Just for me, the most exciting thing is really across industries, the level of intelligence, passion, and dedication of the individuals that we get to work with at our clients. So they're really the ones leading the way. I think they've been in these industries where they've seen these problems, you know, in some cases for decades, have always wanted to solve them. And if you look at not just financial services, but you look at areas like tuberculosis disease surveillance, carbon credits, you know, meeting the UN sustainability goals, solving the unbanked sort of problems that plague certain economies. For me, the most exciting thing is just the breadth of the type of use cases where we see the technology can really help be an enabler, and then just the quality of the people we get to work with, who are just some of the brightest and most passionate people I've worked with in my career.
Peter, do you have anything to add? Or?
Really quickly, I'm going to give an engineering answer, but not about all of this cool stuff we're working on, like zero noise proofs or contract management. The thing that was most exciting recently is we took a developer aside and we said, look, take a week away from your day job and look what you can build in a week on top of the platform. And in a week, they built an end-user facing application that did private document exchange pinned to a blockchain with tokens, a token-based economy, with rating, all of soup to nuts, the whole thing in a week. And that we've got to the point now with our platform and with the technology that you can actually deliver that kind of success in such a short period of time with skills that are actually out there and available for everybody to use. I think it's a real mark of where we are with the technology, and that's really exciting for me.
Yeah, I think 2 years ago, a company could have written a white paper in ICO to build a data exchange with an incentive mechanism, and now it's something you can build in a week, just plugging, you know, together, wiring different APIs, building a lightweight app on top.
And Dan, I'll let you finish.
I'll go very quick because I know we're over time. But what Tim said earlier, that the technology is no longer the constraint in the ecosystem, I think is a testament to what we've all been working on. For me, a major milestone representing that is just last week, a $10+ billion company, Computershare, announced a production-grade system built on top of Hyperledger Besu, and that was the first we'd heard of it. And that's fantastic, right? That's the sort of pace of innovation and adoption that we're starting to see in the ecosystem.
Great. Well, thank you for your time, everyone. And I don't think we have time for questions, but they'll be in the back if you have any.